Hi, I'm Bailey. My father gave our 3,000-acre ranch to my sister, not because I failed him, but because I didn't argue when they talked over me. They told everyone I walked away, but I was never even asked to stay. They changed the company name, erased my photo from our walls, and called me just the vet. But the cattle, the ones they planned to sell off for quick cash, those were mine. And I have the documents to prove it. So how did they think this would end? The morning air still held a touch of summer heat as I trudged across the pasture, my boots sinking slightly into the soft dirt. A chorus of low moos echoed in the background while I bottle-fed the last calf for the morning. Routine had its comfort, especially when the world outside this fence line rarely offered any. Just as I wiped my hands on the back of my jeans, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a message from Carla, my assistant. No text, just a picture. I clicked it open. It was an image of a cream-colored invitation card embossed in gold. The Kressler Ranch Generational Transition Gala. It looked elegant, official, and beneath the grand heading were names: Sherwin Kressler, Isolde Marin Kressler. That was it. Not mine. I stared at it for a moment, trying to reason it away. Maybe they assumed I wouldn't come. Maybe they sent mine by mail. Maybe someone forgot. But when I checked the mailbox later, scrolled through my email, and even double-checked with Carla, there was nothing. No mistake, just silence. I went about my day as usual, or at least I pretended to. I ran my hands through coats, cleaned hooves, gave vaccinations. All the while, the weight of that missing name pressed harder against my chest than any physical chore. It's a funny thing, how absence can feel heavier than presence. By 5, I was in my truck, staring at the old barn in the fading light, debating whether to go. If this were any other day, I'd brush it off. I wasn't one for grand gestures or events with champagne flutes and hollow compliments, but this wasn't any other day. It was a statement, one I couldn't afford to ignore anymore. So I went. I didn't dress for the occasion. I didn't dig through the closet for the one decent dress I owned. I wore what I had on. Work jeans, button-up shirt, boots still caked with pasture soil. I didn't knock. I just walked into the main house, the same way I had since I was a child, only this time the hallway felt foreign. Voices floated through the entryway, laughter bouncing off the walls. The gathering was already in full swing, wine glasses clinking, light music playing. I stood in the doorway of the main room, unseen, or ignored. Either way, the feeling was the same. Isolde spotted me first. She was standing beside our father, her arm delicately looped through his, a flute of champagne in her other hand. Her dress was the color of ivory, clean and tailored. She turned toward me, her smile bright enough for everyone to see and just sharp enough for me to bleed on. "Oh, Bailey," she said with a laugh loud enough to hush the small crowd. "I always knew you were better with cows than people." There was a wave of chuckles. Even Dad grinned. I nodded once, didn't smile, didn't flinch, just stood there like I had when we were girls, when she used to tell our teachers I was a little slow but sweet. Same tone, same poison under the sugar. I moved through the crowd slowly, offering a few polite nods, making sure my boots didn't track too much dust on the rug. I didn't plan to stay long. I found the hors d'oeuvre table, poured myself half a glass of lemonade, avoided eye contact. The conversations buzzed around me, land values, cattle shows, tax credits, like I wasn't even in the room. Eventually, I walked back outside. The night had fallen quickly, and the air had turned still. I made my way to the truck and climbed in, turning the engine just enough for the radio to hum quietly. I didn't cry. Instead, I sat there, eyes locked on the porch lights flickering against the house's white siding. It looked so familiar, yet so far from anything I belonged to. And in the quiet hum of the evening, I remembered my grandfather's voice, years ago, standing with me by the birthing stall when Hope was born. He looked me in the eye and said, "You're the only one who listens to this land, Bailey. Not just works it, listens." I hadn't thought of that moment in years, but now it came roaring back, louder than the music inside that house. They'd written me out of the invitation. Then they laughed when I showed up. And that's when I realized they weren't going to stop pretending I wasn't family, not unless I made them stop. They didn't just erase me from the documents, they erased me from the room. That realization didn't hit me like a wave. It came in quietly, like a slow-moving fog, wrapping itself around my throat as I stepped farther into the living room. The room where I used to nap on the floor as a kid, while Dad and Grandpa talked cattle prices and weather patterns over lukewarm coffee. Now, every chair was filled. My name wasn't on the seating chart because there was no chart. There was only Isolde's plan, and I wasn't part of it. I stood near the back wall, where the coat rack used to be before she had it replaced with an abstract metal sculpture. Her kind of art, expensive, meaningless. Isolde was front and center, smiling like she belonged on the cover of a magazine. Her suit was tailored to perfection, cream-colored with just a hint of shimmer under the light. She held a pen in one hand and a glass of white wine in the other. Sherwin, my father, though the word felt increasingly foreign, sat beside her. His face was stern, like he was doing something difficult but necessary. A man doing what needed to be done. That's how he'd always liked to see himself. Isolde's lawyer stood just behind him, guiding him through the paperwork like a high-stakes chess coach. No one looked at me. Not Dad, not Isolde, not even the family friends I'd known since I was small. I leaned slightly to one side, trying to see the top page as he signed it. I didn't need to read the words. I already knew what they said. Sherwin Kressler was officially handing over controlling interest of our 3,000-acre ranch, the very one that bore his name, to my sister. Isolde let out a soft laugh, almost rehearsed, then turned to the crowd and said, "It's a new era for the Kressler legacy." The room filled with claps and smiles, a few nods of approval. One man whispered something about smart succession planning to the woman next to him. I caught just enough of it to feel my stomach twist. Still, no one looked my way. It wasn't the papers that hurt. I'd expected those. It was the absence of acknowledgement, the erasure of my years, my labor, my loyalty, the complete omission of me. I could hear the blood pulsing in my ears as I stared at the hands that once held mine at county fairs and guided mine when I bottle-fed my first orphaned calf. Now they just gripped a pen that signed me out of my own life. "Thank you all for being here," Isolde continued. "This isn't just a transfer of ownership, it's a transfer of vision, efficiency, scale, innovation. That's what the future of this ranch deserves." Not a single word about tradition, about heritage, about care, and certainly not a single word about me. I stood there long enough to feel my legs go stiff. A few guests began to rise, mingling, refilling drinks. I shifted back toward the hallway, trying to disappear into the woodwork. As I moved to leave, I overheard one of Dad's old friends, Gary Whitman, murmur to another, "Isn't Bailey here?" The woman shook her head. Maybe she finally gave up. Gave up? I wanted to turn around to tell them I hadn't given up. I'd been shoved out, rewritten. But I bit down hard, too proud to beg for visibility. The sound of glass clinking pulled me back. Isolde stood again, her wine raised. "Let's not forget," she said, her eyes sweeping the room until they landed squarely on me. "We'll still need someone to take care of the cows." That line landed like a slap. Polite chuckles echoed. Someone said, "Good one, Isolde." Another, "She's always had a way with animals." I didn't wait for more. I turned and walked out slowly, careful not to trip on the edge of the new rug by the door. My boots hit the porch wood heavier than usual. The air outside was still warm, but I felt cold. I made it to my truck, climbed in, and shut the door behind me. I sat there, hands on the steering wheel, heart pounding without rhythm. For a moment, I stared at the glow of the porch lights. Through the window, I could see them clinking glasses, celebrating what they called a legacy. But legacy meant more than land and money. Legacy was early mornings in the barn. It was nursing sick calves through winter storms. It was the year I stayed behind to run the place while Isolde studied branding strategies in New York. It was the calluses on my palms, the sunburn on my neck. And yet, I had no seat, no name, no voice. They didn't just erase me from the documents, they erased me from the room. By the time I made it back to my clinic, it was almost 11. The drive had been silent, no radio, no calls, just the soft hum of the tires over old county roads and the occasional tap of my fingers against the steering wheel. I didn't rush. I wasn't in any mood to face anyone, and the clinic, at that hour, was the only place in town where no one would ask how the big party went. I parked around back, where the security light barely reached. The place felt like a second skin, the comforting smell of hay, iodine, and warm fur still lingering in the air. I turned on just one lamp in the office, leaving the rest of the building in soft shadow. My desk waited like it always did. Scattered notes, invoices, and the small locked drawer that rarely saw daylight. I opened it slowly. Inside lay the things that had mattered more than any title or applause, the original Morrison Genetics LLC paperwork, all signed and notarized 5 years ago, and a photo. Not just any photo, the one of me and Hope, taken the day she was born. I must have been 28 then, hair tied back, jeans stained, kneeling beside the tiny wet calf with my hand still under her neck. Grandpa had taken that picture himself, then printed and framed it. For a long time, it had hung in the ranch hallway, a silent badge of who was truly there, until it vanished. I sat back and held the photo in my hands, eyes tracing the edge of the frame. 10 years could change a lot, but it hadn't changed what that moment meant. I could still hear his voice, plain as day, when he leaned down and said, "One day, they'll call this place yours." He hadn't whispered it like a hope. He'd said it like a fact, like something already decided. But facts don't mean much when the story gets rewritten. That photo was gone from the house now, as was I, not just physically, but erased from memory. I didn't sleep that night. Around 1:30, I drove back to the main house, not to confront, just to confirm something that had been gnawing at the back of my mind. The house was quiet. Most of the guests had gone home, lights dimmed to a soft glow in the hallways. I let myself in through the back, the same way I always had. The air inside was stale with the remnants of too many people and too little sincerity. I walked to the front hallway, where the new legacy wall had been installed last spring. It used to be a collection of casual photos, candids of our family through the years, Mom's garden party, Dad's first cattle auction, me and Isolde in matching overalls at 6. Now it was a professionally curated installation, black frames, matte prints, and the plaque above, the Kressler Vision, Generations of Strength. I scanned each frame carefully, not one photo of me, not from shows, not from sales, not from the years I ran the ranch when Dad had surgery. But then I saw one, Hope in her prime, standing proud in a pasture at sunset. And there, standing beside her, a woman in crisp white, Isolde. Not possible. I stepped closer, squinting at the edges. The background had been altered. I knew that picture. I had the original version. It had been me beside Hope. The angle, the way the sun hit her left ear, the placement of the gatepost. It was all identical. They had cropped me out. I didn't feel anger in that moment, not yet. What I felt was something quieter, deeper, like finding out someone had sold your mother's wedding ring to pay for a party you weren't invited to. I walked back out the way I came, pulled into the clinic again around 3, and sat at my desk in silence for a long while. This wasn't a case of being forgotten. It was deliberate. Erasing me from the ranch wasn't enough. Isolde wanted to rewrite the entire narrative, make herself the lone heir of legacy, the face of our family, the soul of a place she had only come back to after it was polished. I opened my laptop, pulled out a backup drive, and started gathering everything: scanned letters from Grandpa, photographs, financial statements, bloodline charts, the ones showing how every prize-winning animal from the last decade had come through my breeding program. I wasn't going to throw a fit. I wasn't going to demand a seat at a table already cleared of anything real. I was going to build my own. I labeled the folder, "When They Forget Who Built It." By the second morning after the gala, I had begun to feel the kind of numb that comes from too many wounds, too fast. Not sharp pain anymore, just the dull awareness of things being wrong. I sat in my office early, the sun barely rising, flipping through files I'd already read twice. The silence was only broken by the occasional thud of hooves from the nearby barn and the mechanical whir of the coffee maker sputtering out the last drops. I was halfway through logging a calf's antibiotics when my phone buzzed. It was a number I recognized. Tom Rivers, a longtime buyer from Abilene. We hadn't talked since last fall's breeding season. "Hey, Bailey," he started, voice casual. "Listen, just wanted to double-check. You still involved in the Kressler breeding contracts?" "I got an update from Isolde's team about a switch. Said you're stepping back?" I blinked, phone pressed to my ear. "I'm sorry." "What switch?" He cleared his throat. "New documents came through last night. Everything's now under Sterling Genetics. It all looked official. Just wanted to hear it from you before I sign anything." I didn't answer right away. My jaw tensed. "Tom, I've signed nothing. No changes have been made on my end. Send me what you received." He promised he would, and we hung up. My hands didn't move for a while. I sat there, staring out the window, watching a crow hop along the gravel path. Unconcerned, unbothered. I envied it. 30 minutes later, an email popped into my inbox. Attached was a multi-page PDF. Top header, Sterling Genetics. Presenter, Isolde Kressler. My name, gone. I scrolled. My bull lines, my herd performance metrics, my breeding rotation schedules, all still there, just without my name, my company, or any legal attribution. Buried in the last page was a quote: "Streamlining operations for a new era of ranching." My name wasn't forgotten. It was removed. Later that day, needing some air and something solid to chew on, I drove to the diner in town. I sat in the back booth, ordered coffee and hash browns, and pretended to scroll my phone. Behind me, 2 older ranch wives were talking. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but their voices, a touch too loud and a bit too practiced, made it impossible to miss. "She never really wanted it anyway," one said. "Yeah," the other replied. "Isolde told me she's always been more into animals than people. Said Bailey even declined the ranch years ago." My throat tightened, not with sadness, with disbelief. So now I'd not only been removed from the paperwork, but painted as someone who chose to walk away. All those years, working holidays, missing weddings, sleeping in the barn during storms, dismissed as personal preference. When I left the diner, I didn't go back to the clinic. I turned the truck toward the ranch house. Dad's truck was parked under the carport when I arrived. I didn't knock. I walked in like I used to, straight through the side door and into the main room, where Sherwin was sitting in his chair with the afternoon paper folded on his lap. He looked up. "Bailey," he said simply, not surprised. I got straight to the point. "Why is Isolde signing my contracts?" He blinked, as if the question was more complicated than it was. "She's stepping up, taking on what you weren't ready for." The words landed like a slap, but I didn't flinch. "I never said I wasn't ready," I answered, voice level. "I said I wasn't asked." Sherwin set the paper down. "Bailey, come on. You've always preferred staying out of the mess. You made your choices." "I made my choices because I had to. While you were getting surgeries and Isolde was consulting from a distance, someone had to run the land." He rubbed his forehead like the conversation was an inconvenience. "You're good at what you do, Bailey. No one denies that. But this is about the future, growth, big moves." I stepped forward. "You think growth means erasing the people who built it, who kept it breathing when it was about to fold?" He didn't answer, and maybe that was all the answer I needed. I left without another word. By sundown, I had driven straight to the county clerk's office. It was nearly closing time, but they knew me there. I filed a notarized ownership notice for Morrison Genetics, reinforcing the exclusive rights to every bloodline that passed through my program, past and present. No need to explain. The papers spoke for themselves. Later that evening, I sat at my desk in the clinic, the air cool and quiet around me. The stars had just started peeking through the window panes. I picked up my phone, opened a new message thread with my attorney, and typed 3 words: "Time to talk." 2 mornings later, I found myself back at the ranch house. Not because I wanted to be, but because Sherwin had insisted on hosting a small brunch with some of his longtime ranch partners. He called it a thank you gathering for their support during transition. I called it something else in my head. A staged event where I'd be trotted out as proof everything was still one big happy family. I didn't dress up, didn't wear anything that suggested I was there to impress. Just clean jeans, a chambray shirt, and my hair pulled back into a ponytail. It was how I looked when I did real work. That morning, I figured I'd show up like myself, even if they'd all forgotten who that was. I walked in through the back door, as I always had growing up. Inside, Isolde was already holding court in the dining room. She was dressed in pale gray linen, soft makeup, polished heels. She stood beside Sherwin like she'd always belonged there. Her voice rose and fell in that smooth, curated way of hers, the way politicians talked on TV. There were 8 guests seated around the dining table, mostly men in button-downs and clean cowboy boots, the kind who hadn't worked a pasture in a decade. A few nodded politely at me, but no one got up. The only open chair was off to the side, near the window. It wasn't part of the conversation. I poured myself coffee from the carafe, sat quietly, and listened. They talked about expansion plans, a new app Isolde's team was developing to track feeding cycles, and how branding matters more than breeding now. I sipped slowly, forcing myself not to react. And then Sherwin, sitting straight-backed at the head of the table, looked directly at me for the first time that morning and said it, casually, like a compliment, like I should feel honored. "She knows cows better than people. She should stick to them." The room chuckled. One man actually tipped his cup toward me like he was toasting. I didn't laugh, didn't say a word, but my stomach dropped like someone had pulled the floor from under me. That one sentence, those 9 words, were worse than being left off the invitation, worse than having my name stripped from the contracts. because this time he said it to my face. Not like I wasn't there, but like he wanted me to hear it, to believe it. I didn't finish my coffee. I stood, set the cup down gently, and walked out without looking back. The drive back to my clinic blurred by. I don't even remember which roads I took. I just remember the silence, and those 9 words echoing over and over. She knows cows better than people. She should stick to them. I remembered staying up all night nursing him through pneumonia 2 winters ago. I remembered sleeping in a chair by his hospital bed, handling payroll and cattle feed orders from my phone. I remembered being the one who stayed when everyone else flew home for holidays. But none of that mattered, did it? By the time I reached my office, the afternoon sun had dipped enough to cast long shadows through the side windows. I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat at my desk, breathing. And then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Isolde. I wasn't in the mood, but I checked it anyway. My thumb hesitated before tapping the screen. The message wasn't meant for me. It read, "The dumb cow whisperer won't fight. She never has." There was no context, just that. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't reply, didn't throw the phone, didn't scream. I just read it over and over, and something inside me snapped, not violently, but with precision. Like the sound of wire pulled too tight, finally giving way. She never has. She was right, of course. I hadn't fought, not publicly, not loudly. I'd let them talk, let them assume, let them take, but I wouldn't anymore. That night, I pulled out my laptop and opened a new document. I began writing a press release under the Morrison Genetics name, a name they had forgotten, but I still legally owned. I laid out the full scope of our breeding program, the genetic milestones we'd achieved, the data that supported our 6-figure contracts. I pulled up photos, timelines, audit trails, all tied directly to me, my records, and my files. I created a spreadsheet that tracked the lineage of every champion bull that had come through our line in the last 10 years, all originating with Morrison Genetics, my name on every report. Then I called the bank to confirm something I hadn't checked in months. The Morrison Genetics account, the one Grandpa set up for future expansion, was still untouched, still protected. When the call ended, I looked at the time. Nearly midnight. I stood, stretched, and walked out to the barn. The night was cool and silent except for a few owls calling in the distance. I walked down the aisle slowly, touching each stall gate as I passed. Hope was asleep, her breathing slow and steady. I leaned on the rail beside her, the smell of hay and warm fur grounding me. They thought I'd stay quiet. They thought I'd stay in my place. They thought I'd let them write the story. But I've been here all along, building, watching, remembering. And now I'm ready. The drive down to Dallas took just under 2 hours, but in my head, it stretched much longer. I left just before dawn, wanting time to walk the show floor before the crowd thickened. I didn't play music. I didn't make a phone call. I just kept my hands steady on the wheel, watching the empty road unfold before me, and rehearsed what I would and wouldn't say, to Isolde, to potential buyers, to myself. By the time I pulled into the expo center, the parking lot was already dotted with rigs and pickups, banners flapping in the breeze. I parked farther back than usual, not because I had to, there were still open spots, but because I needed the extra steps to settle my breath. Inside, the space buzzed. The Texas Cattlemen's Expo was the kind of event where industry veterans shook hands over black coffee, young ranchers compared calf weight gains, and everyone eyed each other's boots. I'd walked these halls a dozen times, but this time, I wasn't here as a vet or a rancher or even a daughter. I was here as the rightful owner of something they'd tried to steal. That's when I saw it. A massive screen over booth 12. Sterling Genetics, Legacy Meets Innovation with Isolde Kressler. My stomach turned. There, plastered in full color, were charts I had built, data I had logged at 3 a.m. in the clinic, photos I had taken of bulls mid-stride, flanked by calves whose bloodlines I had tracked since birth, all rebranded as if I had never existed. I walked closer. My name wasn't anywhere. At the booth, a young man in a polo shirt with Sterling embroidered on the chest handed out glossy folders. I took one and opened it. Page after page mirrored the files on my hard drive. Slight tweaks, design flourishes, but the content was mine. As I flipped to the fourth page, a gray-haired man stepped beside me and leaned in. "You one of the handlers?" he asked, casually. "I'd like to speak with the exec, the real decision-maker." I looked up at him, not unkindly, and offered a half-smile. "You already are." His brow lifted. "You're Bailey Kressler, Morrison Genetics." His eyes widened slightly. "Well, I'll be damned." I didn't need to explain further. I saw the recognition pass over his face, the shift from confusion to something like embarrassment. He glanced at the folder in his hand, then back at me. "I was told this was all Isolde's work." "You were told wrong," I replied. I turned and walked toward the side corridor where a row of quieter meeting booths lined the wall. I slid into one, pulled out my tablet, and connected to the venue's Wi-Fi. Within minutes, I uploaded my full genetic archive to a private cloud link. Every breeding contract, every award-winning bull's lineage, every lab result. I wrote a brief email to my contact list, clients, breeders, buyers, and attached the link. Subject line, "For accuracy in representation from the true source." I hit send. 5 minutes later, I received a reply from Hank Morales, one of the biggest breeders in West Texas. "Appreciate the clarity. Had a weird feeling, canceling our boothside deal with Sterling." That was the first domino. By noon, I'd already fielded 3 more messages just like it. I didn't gloat. Not outwardly, I kept moving. In the early afternoon, I met with a group of industry peers in a private booth. Men and women who'd worked with my grandfather, who'd bought from my lines for years. I handed each of them a folder, no gloss, no gold lettering, just truth. "I'm not here to discredit anyone," I told them. "You're free to do business with whoever you like. Just make sure they actually own what they're selling." There was a silence in the room that didn't feel empty. It felt like confirmation, like they already knew. As I stepped out, I caught a glimpse of Isolde across the aisle. She was speaking with a man in a suit who looked increasingly skeptical. Her voice was louder than usual, her gestures wider. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. A few booths over, her assistant picked up a call. His face tightened. I knew that look. Loss. By the time I walked through the exit doors, the sky had shifted. What had started as a crisp morning now gave way to a warm, amber light washing over the parking lot. I reached my truck, opened the door, and glanced once more over my shoulder at the banner still hanging above the Sterling booth. "Legacy Meets Innovation." I smiled. Let's see who really owns it. The call came just before 6. My phone buzzed once on the nightstand, the kind of buzz that never means anything good at that hour. I was already awake, hadn't really slept, just lying there, arms folded over my chest, eyes fixed on the ceiling fan as it creaked through its slow, endless rotations. "Miss Bailey?" It was Nate, one of the younger ranch hands still working the south paddocks. "One of the new calves isn't responding. She won't stand up. We've done everything we were told, but it's bad." I didn't need to ask which one. Hope's last heifer, born small but full of fire. I'd only just weaned her from supplemental feeding a few weeks ago. I threw on jeans and boots and drove without brushing my hair, still in the same sweatshirt from the night before. The gravel under my tires cracked in protest as I rolled up to the pen. Nate was standing just outside the stall, hat off, hands wringing. She was still breathing when I stepped in, barely, chest rising with effort. Eyes dull, not frightened, just resigned. I didn't cry. I'd cried plenty for calves over the years, but not this one, not right now. I knelt beside her, placed a hand on her side, felt the labored rhythm beneath my palm. I looked around the pen. No clean straw, water dish tipped sideways. They'd overcrowded this paddock. Too many stressed animals jammed together for Isolda's AI breeding plan. No one checking recovery rates, no post-weaning protocols, just efficiency charts. The heifer stopped breathing 7 minutes later. No noise, no drama, just silence. I told Nate I'd take care of it. He didn't argue. I dug the hole myself, out by the East Grove where Grandpa and I used to walk on cool fall evenings. The soil was softer there. I didn't mark the grave with anything fancy, just a stone, flat and simple. When I finished, I stood still for a while, staring at that small patch of earth. The wind moved the trees around me gently, as if offering comfort I didn't ask for. No one came to help. Not Tia, not any of the hands, not Sherwin. They were all busy prepping for Isolda's next big announcement. Some media event, last I heard. I went home, showered off the dust, and sat at my desk to catch my breath. That's when the live stream notification buzzed on my laptop. Kressler Ranch, live announcement. Curiosity and fury don't play well together, but I clicked. There she was, Isolda, standing in front of the main barn, flanked by crisp signage and potted succulents someone probably rented just for the press. "We're thrilled to announce," she said with that trademark warmth that made strangers trust her instantly, "our full transition into next-gen breeding with Sterling Genetics." Her voice didn't shake once. "As part of this shift, we'll be auctioning off the remaining legacy stock, including Hope, our prized dam, to make way for a new line built on data, not sentiment." I stared at the screen, my knuckles white from gripping the edge of the table. Hope, not just any cow, the heart of our bloodline, the animal my grandfather once called the soul of this place. And now, a line item in her pitch deck. The camera panned slightly, catching Sherwin nodding in the background, as if this had been the plan all along, as if the past meant nothing. I drove back to the ranch in under 15 minutes. The gate was closed when I arrived, but I still had the code. I parked behind the main barn and made my way around the back, toward the pasture. Hope stood in her usual pen, calm, unaware. And the gate had a new padlock, the kind we never used, industrial, impersonal. A boy, maybe 16, face I didn't recognize, stepped forward from the shadows. "I'm sorry, Miss Bailey," he said, hesitating. "I was told you're not allowed back here. Orders came from up top." I nodded once. Understood. Then I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out a red ribbon, worn but intact, the same kind Grandpa tied to Hope's stall when she was just a calf. I looped it through the gate, knotted it gently, and stepped back. "Let her know someone remembers," I said quietly, mostly to myself. I walked away without looking back. Back at the clinic, I didn't pause to breathe. I locked the door, shut the blinds, and opened the file drawer beneath my desk. Out came the folder labeled Contingency. Inside were the original registration documents, transfer restrictions, genetic ownership claims, a notarized clause about Hope's bloodline requiring ethical management in line with traditional breeding methods, signed by Grandpa himself and filed with the county in 2014. I pulled out my phone. The first call was to my lawyer, the second to the state livestock registry, the third, the press. A week passed in a haze of paperwork, legal coordination, and more silence than I thought I could stand. I kept to myself, fielded questions only when necessary, and waited for the one day that would change everything. Isolde's legacy expansion ceremony was set for a Saturday afternoon, perfect timing to catch press, industry partners, and just enough social media to make it trend. I didn't get an invitation, of course, but that wasn't needed. I already knew the schedule, the talking points, even the menu. Her team wasn't as tight-lipped as they thought. I arrived 30 minutes early, dressed in a tan blouse and dark slacks. Nothing flashy. Just enough to blend in with the crowd. I parked around the far side of the pasture lot, next to the equipment shed, where guests weren't expected to come. The event was already humming. String lights were being adjusted, folding chairs set in perfect rows, the ranch logo, or rather Sterling Cattle Genetics, printed across crisp white banners. The new marquee stood tall above the entrance gate. Sterling Cattle Genetics, revolution begins here. No mention of Morrison, of Kressler, of me. I stayed back at first, close to the shade of the big pecan tree near the pasture fence. My hands were steady, but my heart thudded with the rhythm of something final. Inside my bag was a manila envelope, thick with originals, notarized pages, certified copies, proof of everything they tried to steal. As people settled, the lead reporter from Texas Farm Media stepped forward with a clipboard. I caught him just as he finished a conversation with one of Isolde's assistants. "Excuse me," I said. "I'd like you to have this." He raised a brow, taking the envelope with a bit of hesitation. "You're Bailey Kressler, Morrison Genetics, the name that's missing." His expression shifted. I could see the wheels turning. "What is this?" "Facts," I said. "The kind you might want before quoting anyone." He opened it right there, skimming the first few pages. Then he saw the flash drive clipped to the back flap. "It's all in there," I added. "The legal history, the ownership filings, and a recorded will, signed by the man who built this place." His eyebrows shot up. "Sherwin?" "No, my grandfather, the one who actually understood what legacy meant." The ribbon cutting was just beginning. Isolde stood on the makeshift stage beside Sherwin, her hair perfectly waved, her smile wide and rehearsed. She started her speech as the reporter stepped away from me and spoke urgently into his headset. I watched as something shifted on stage. A whisper into her ear, her mouth pausing mid-sentence. Then the screen behind her, the one prepped for her promotional video, flickered. It wasn't her video that played. It was my grandfather, grainy, old, but unmistakable. He sat at his desk, hat off, hands folded, voice strong. "I created Morrison Genetics to preserve the work of 3 generations. This legacy, especially the bloodlines of Hope and her descendants, is entrusted solely to Bailey Kressler. This isn't a gift, it's recognition, because she's the one who stayed." There were gasps from the audience, murmurs, then silence. I felt none of the panic I expected, no shakiness, just breath. The screen went dark. Reporters swarmed Isolde. One cameraman turned his lens toward the side gate where a truck had just pulled up. Livestock trailer hitched. The vet stepped out, clipboard in hand, legal documents in tow. Hope was led out gently, head high, her red ribbon still tied to the halter. She followed me without resistance, walking down the gravel path like she knew what was happening. I didn't turn back to look at Isolde. I didn't need to. Sherwin didn't say a word. He stood motionless as the trailer door closed and the latch clicked. Tia met me by the driver's side, arms crossed, tears in her eyes. She hadn't worked at the ranch for months, but she showed up that day. "He knew it, Bailey," she said softly. All along, he just didn't want to lose her again. I didn't reply, not out of coldness, just that nothing needed to be said. I drove out slowly, the gravel kicking up dust behind me, Hope's silhouette visible through the trailer slats. Later that week, I sat in an attorney's office and signed new paperwork. Kressler Farms, now officially operating in joint partnership with Morrison Genetics. Clean, simple, protected. I wasn't taking everything, just what was always mine. The legacy wasn't just protected, it finally had the right name on it. After the ceremony, the days moved differently. The ranch didn't buzz the way it used to. It exhaled. No more corporate teams walking around with clipboards, no more email blasts or photo ops, just the sound of cows calling across the pasture and the rhythmic clack of gates swinging closed in the wind. Isolde packed up the following Monday. I didn't see her go, but Tia told me she'd left early, just after sunrise. No goodbye, no message. Just a text to Sherwin and a signed deed for the property she bought 2 counties over. Something smaller, easier to manage. Sherwin didn't say much either. He kept to the main house, his schedule more rigid than ever. He hadn't come by the clinic since the unveiling, hadn't asked about the new calf, or stopped to comment on the press, or even said the word hope. The man who once ran every fence line with me in the truck didn't seem to know where I worked anymore, but I still showed up every morning before dawn. The work never stopped, and truth be told, I didn't want it to. Routine kept me grounded, feeding, checking vitals, monitoring pregnancies. It was something solid beneath all the noise. Late one afternoon, I was in the far stall of the clinic tending to a calf that had taken a rough fall. Nothing broken, just a limp that would need watching. The barn doors creaked open behind me. I didn't look up. Footsteps crossed the concrete, light and small. Not Sherwin's, not any of the hired hands. I turned. Lily stood there. Isolde's daughter. 14 now, maybe 15. Hair pulled back, jeans too long for her legs, a worn canvas bag slung over her shoulder. She didn't speak at first, just walked up and handed me something. A notebook. Brown leather, cracked at the edges. My breath caught when I saw the initials pressed into the bottom corner. W.J.K. My grandfather's. He left it in Mom's old office, Lily said softly. I don't think she ever opened it. I figured, maybe it's meant for you. I took it slowly, nodding once. Thank you. She hesitated, then glanced at the calf beside me. She's okay? She'll heal, I said. Takes time, but she'll walk straight again. Lily gave me a faint smile, then walked out without another word. When I got back inside later that evening, I made tea and sat at my kitchen table with the notebook. It smelled faintly of tobacco and dust, familiar, almost comforting. Most of the entries were in Grandpa's tidy block-letter handwriting. Breeding notes, pasture maps, supply logs. Then, halfway through, I found a folded page marked with a corner crease. I opened it. Legacy doesn't live in land or stock, the page read. It lives in who's willing to wake up before the sun for it. I sat there for a long time, staring at those words. They weren't poetic, they weren't fancy, but they were him, plain, purposeful, exact. He knew who I was, even when others tried to forget. The next morning, I was feeding the heifers when I saw Sherwin's truck pull into the lot. He didn't park out front, just turned off the engine halfway up the drive, got out, and leaned against the fence near the gate. I finished my work before approaching. He didn't wave, didn't smile. Morning, he said. Morning, I echoed. He looked past me toward the barn. It's running smoother now. It's working, I said. Another pause. I was wrong, he said finally, about how things should have passed down. I didn't answer, not right away. He didn't follow it with "I'm sorry." He didn't offer an excuse, just that one admission, clean, spare, quiet. And maybe that was all there was room for between us now. I nodded once. He gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod back before turning and walking toward his truck. That afternoon, I took Hope's newest calf, barely 6 weeks old, out to the main pasture. She trotted beside me, still a little clumsy, ears twitching at every bird that called overhead. I led her along the old trail behind the barn, the same one Grandpa used to walk every Sunday. At the fence line, I met with 2 young women from the ag school nearby. I handed over copies of our new mentorship program and showed them the new rotation pasture that would be theirs to manage come spring. Real work, I told them. Dirty work, the kind that makes you want to quit some days. But if you're still standing at the end of a week like that, then maybe it's the work that belongs to you. They nodded, serious, wide-eyed, hungry for it. As the sun dipped, I walked the long way back, cutting through the grove where we buried the heifer. The grass had started growing over the stone, quiet, unremarkable, but solid. By the time I reached the old oak tree behind the barn, the sky had turned that particular shade of gold that only happens in late fall. I placed my hand on the trunk, worn smooth by time and memory. "You were right, Grandpa," I whispered. "The land remembers." Then I turned, and I walked forward, never once looking back. Some wounds don't need to close completely. They just need to stop bleeding. Some people think legacy is just about land and titles, but the truth is, legacy lives in those who show up day after day, even when no one's watching. What would you do if your own family tried to erase you? Let me know in the comments. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stick around for more powerful stories like this one.